I don't know where you are right now in your journey of personal growth, but if you're anything like me, someone who has struggled to focus on a single task for even 10 minutes, then this story is for you. Not because you're weak, not because you lack motivation or willpower, but because there's an invisible mechanism, a sophisticated chain of biological reactions quietly reprogramming your brain every time you pick up your phone. Just for a second. I've been there, sometimes scrolling through the news, sometimes checking messages, sometimes opening a short video just for a quick laugh. But all of those moments, however small, however seemingly harmless, we're feeding something much bigger, a dopamine loop, a cycle that conditions your brain to expect instant rewards without real effort. And over time, it erodes one of the most precious human abilities, the ability to focus deeply. Have you ever felt busy all day, but ended up accomplishing nothing meaningful? Have you ever felt like your mind was being pulled in every direction, always active but going nowhere? I used to feel like that too. And I realized the problem wasn't a lack of determination. The problem was that I was being controlled not by someone else, but by dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's not bad. In fact, dopamine is a vital part of the nervous system. It allows you to experience joy, drives you to take action, and motivates you to pursue goals. The problem is, in today's world, dopamine is no longer triggered by things with long-term meaning, but by taps on a screen, social media likes, and 15-second funny videos. Every click is a tiny dopamine hit that makes you feel good for a moment, but weaker over time. You're not wrong for wanting to feel good. That's a survival instinct. But what compels me to sit down and share this story with you is not to blame dopamine. It's to help you reclaim control of your own nervous system, because if you understand how dopamine works, you can begin to retrain your brain so it no longer falls prey to instant rewards, but instead reaches for something deeper, meaningful work, sustainable creativity, long-lasting focus. I'm not going to tell you to quit your phone for 30 days or delete all your social media to succeed. Those things might help temporarily, but if you want true change, you need more than a short-term challenge. You need a reprogramming, a real dopamine detox, not just behavioral, but biological. You need to understand how your brain reacts, how it forms habits, and how you can intervene to create change from the roots. This video, or more accurately, this journey that I'm inviting you to take, isn't a burst of temporary motivation. This is a map, a roadmap grounded in neuroscience, real-world experience, and disciplined commitment, designed to pull you out of the chaos of distraction and bring you into the state of deep work, where you operate with complete presence, burning creativity, and a profound sense of fulfillment. From here, we'll walk with you, not as a teacher, but as someone who once got swept away and is now slowly making his way back. Each chapter of this journey will open a new door, from understanding what dopamine truly is to redesigning your environment, habits, and how you operate internally. And then you'll begin to see one thing clearly. It's not that you lack ability, it's just that you haven't yet learned how to use it the right way. And that's the very thing I want you to truly see. Dopamine, something that seems to merely bring fleeting pleasure, is actually quietly steering how you think, choose, and live every moment of your life. It's not just a momentary feel-good sensation. It's a deep mechanism that shapes your behavior, your habits, and your ability to concentrate. Once you understand this, you'll stop trying to merely motivate yourself and start learning how to intervene at the very source of your internal impulses. That's the moment you stop being swept away by life and start choosing to live with true awareness and control from within. Have you ever felt this? You just put your phone down not even a full minute ago, and yet something urges you to pick it up again, not because there's an important call, not because of an urgent message, but because of a vague feeling, a small voice inside that says, just check to see if there's anything new. I lived with that feeling for years, thinking it was just a trivial habit, a normal social reflex in the digital age. But then one day, I truly stopped and asked myself a question that seemed simple. Who's actually in control here? I thought I was the one making the decisions. I believed I had willpower. I planned, I set goals, I journaled each morning about the most important things of the day, but somehow, amidst all these seemingly intentional actions, I kept getting pulled into unconscious behaviors, checking my phone dozens of times an hour, hopping from one app to the next, and ultimately achieving nothing with real depth. That's when I began to suspect maybe the one making decisions in me isn't entirely me, but something else. Something quieter, more biological, more primal. And so I began the journey of discovering dopamine. Dopamine, a name that sounds like some distant medical concept reserved for neuroscientists, turns out to be your most loyal companion or your most silent manipulator throughout your life. It's the neurotransmitter responsible for feelings of pleasure, excitement, motivation, success, and desire. Whenever you achieve something, whether it's as big as signing $1 million contract or as small as hearing that ping of a new message, dopamine dances in your brain, signaling, do it again, keep going, one more time. But what I didn't know, and what most people don't know, is that dopamine isn't just released when you get a reward, but also when you're anticipating one. Anticipation is what triggers dopamine most intensely. And that's why smartphones have become the perfect addiction machines. They don't just deliver rewards, they constantly tease you with the promise of them. A blinking icon, a red notification, a video about to load. You don't even need a real reward, just the promise is enough for dopamine to pull you into the spiral. I began to realize I wasn't as free as I thought. I wasn't in charge of my behavior. My brain, more specifically the dopamine system within it, was controlling my reactions, my choices, and how I spent my most precious resource, time. Worse, my brain was becoming less sensitive to long-term rewards, things like reading a book, writing a report, or learning a new skill, no matter how beneficial, no longer triggered immediate dopamine. And because I had become so accustomed to the fast pace of digital stimulation, my brain began to reject everything that moved slowly. I called it boredom, but in reality, it was a biological inability to appreciate depth. I would sit down to do something meaningful, but my brain gave me no reward. So I'd quit and return to the quick swipe of the screen. The first moment of awakening came when I could no longer focus on anything for more than 10 minutes. I started feeling like a busy yet hollow human, doing many things but mastering none, touching vast amounts of information but retaining nothing long enough to become wisdom. I would read but drift off. I'd try to write but couldn't stay coherent. I'd sit in front of my work screen but feel like I was standing outside myself, watching a version of me typing away without soul. I knew something was wrong. I knew I had to reclaim control. I began studying dopamine, not as a scientist, but as someone just waking up after years of being hypnotized by unconscious taps and swipes. I realized that dopamine is a natural part of being human, but when it's exploited by technology, especially systems designed to mine dopamine, it becomes a double-edged sword. The sad truth is, in this era, you don't need to be addicted to alcohol or drugs to damage your dopamine system. You just need a smartphone and a social media account. That's enough. But I didn't stop at awareness. I wanted to know, is there a way to retrain dopamine? Could I teach my brain to feel joy again from things that are slow, deep, difficult, and effortful? Could I renew the brain's reward system so it stops chasing cheap highs and starts to regenerate enthusiasm for depth? I began practicing the early principles of a dopamine detox, not in an extreme, harsh, discipline kind of way, but as biological reprogramming. Step by step, day by day, I reduced the easy hits. I observed the restlessness in my body every time I disconnected. I practiced sitting with emptiness. I relearned how to focus, like a child learning to walk. And gradually, I began to feel the return of another version of me, quieter, deeper, truly present in everything I did. I share this with you not as someone who's escaped dopamine, but as someone who is learning to live with it mindfully each day, because dopamine isn't evil. It's a tool. The only question is, who's driving? If you don't know clearly, then the one driving is not you. And that's something I've lived through and something I never want to return to. I used to think the problem was just me, that I was the one lacking discipline, easily distracted, not as determined as all those successful people out there. But the deeper I went into the journey of understanding dopamine, the more I realized this isn't just my personal battle. It's a silent epidemic that most of us, including you, are facing without even realizing it. And the culprit doesn't lie in your personality, but in the way this world has been designed. The modern world is saturated with dopamine. Every corner of your living space, every app you open, every video you mindlessly scroll past has been meticulously engineered with a single goal: to capture your attention. And the reward for that attention? Dopamine. This isn't a vague assumption. It's science. It's data. Tech companies understand your brain's neural mechanisms better than you understand yourself. They know what excites your mind, what makes you click, stay, react, and come back again. And they use that knowledge to craft experiences that are nearly irresistible, like a 24-hour candy shop inside your mind, free of charge, no invitation needed. Just stay as long as possible. And what's the result? Your brain begins to grow lazy in a biological sense. It no longer wants to do things that require patience, effort, and depth, because those things don't release dopamine as quickly as watching a short clip or tapping a bright red notification. I know it may sound simple, but if you really pause and observe your daily behavior, you'll see the truth clearly. You're living in a world where dopamine is handed out like candy everywhere, all the time, to the point where your brain can no longer tell the difference between real rewards and deception. Let me ask you something, honestly, with no judgment. Can you remember the last time you focused on a task for an hour without touching your phone? The last time you read over 30 pages of a book without being pulled away by a single ping? Or a full day where you didn't feel uneasy simply because nothing new happened online? If you've ever found yourself in that state, let me know by commenting the number 1 below. I don't just want to see that you're following. I want to feel that you, like me, are longing for something more real, deeper, and more meaningful than a fleeting burst of dopamine. And I thank you for being here, truly present in this moment. When I began to grasp the scale of this issue, I understood that I couldn't just detox on my own. Because the problem wasn't that I had used too much social media. It was that everything around me was being programmed so I couldn't stop. Ads popped up the moment I got bored. New content appeared just as I was about to leave. An email sent at 10 p.m. would pull me back to my laptop even after I'd planned to sleep. This was no longer a matter of personal habits. This was a dopamine ecosystem, industrialized, where you are the product, not the user. What's even more dangerous is this: your brain doesn't recognize the shift. It doesn't warn you that it's going numb. It just feels restless when it's not being stimulated, and you mistakenly believe you're lacking motivation. But the truth is, you're lacking stillness. You're lacking an environment designed to let your brain rest and recover. You're lacking the ability to step outside the dopamine stream, to see yourself again. The strange paradox is, the more surrounded we are by dopamine, the more we think we need more external motivation. But what we really need is less notifications, less choices, less stimulation, less speed, and a return to something deeper, a worthy task, an uninterrupted block of time, a journey where the reward comes from presence, not from a push alert. I'm not saying you need to abandon technology. I'm not advocating extremism or moving to the mountains alone, but I am inviting you to look again, truly look again, at how your brain is existing in this world. Because if you're not consciously aware of how dopamine is shaping every little decision you make, you will continue to live a life that's being manipulated without even knowing it. And if you don't design your own response, the outside world will keep designing you into what it wants you to be. There's one truth I've learned after many years of trial and error. You can't fight dopamine with sheer willpower, because dopamine is stronger than inspiration. It runs deeper than logic. It's embedded in your biology. But you can retrain it, not by eliminating it, but by redirecting it toward things that hold greater value. And to do that, you need two things: clear awareness and a consistent strategy. From here, I'm going to tell you how I began to start over, not by forcing myself to focus, but by freeing my brain from the things that were suffocating it. Because if this world has been designed to numb your mind, then you absolutely can design a life where your brain is healed and reawakened to its natural ability to focus powerfully, sustainably, and with deep purpose. We often believe that as long as we work hard enough, stay busy enough, and maintain high productivity, we'll eventually reach a sense of fulfillment. But then there are days when you work from morning to night, handle dozens of tasks, jump from one thing to another, check off a to-do list as long as your arm, yet by the end of the day you feel hollow, a very real, very clear emptiness, but you can't quite name it. You lie down, not exactly tired, but not happy either. No sense of accomplishment, no feeling of progress, just something inside you that feels drained. And you don't understand why. And I want to tell you why that happens from a neurological perspective, with dopamine as the key to decoding it. Dopamine doesn't only appear when you achieve something, it also shows up when you're anticipating something. It's the brain's signal to guide you. There's the reward, go that way. But when you constantly work in a distracted state, constantly jump from one easy task to another, constantly get interrupted by notifications, messages, new tabs, new videos, you're experiencing a series of short, disconnected dopamine spikes. Your brain gets rewarded, but there's no real reward. It's like eating too much sugar. You feel full, but lack nutrition. You're busy, but empty. You do a lot, but go shallow, and then you feel depleted. That's the dopamine loop. You start something, get interrupted, switch to something easier, feel a small dopamine hit, then look for the next quick fix over and over until you lose the ability for deep work, no longer have the motivation to stay with hard tasks, and more dangerously, you stop feeling joy even after real effort. Instead, your joy becomes conditioned to quick stimulation, meaning only things that are easily accessible, quickly completed, and instantly gratifying can still activate you. So what happens when real work, the kind worth doing, doesn't provide immediate gratification? You quit. Or worse, you continue but feel like it's meaningless. I fell into that exact loop. There were times when I worked all day, yet felt like I hadn't truly lived a single one. I hit goals, but didn't feel like I arrived. I finished projects, but felt nothing writing the final line. I gradually lost the ability to feel depth in the things I once loved. Writing was no longer an inner journey, but a task. Reading wasn't discovery anymore, but a duty. And connecting with others was no longer presence, but a string of quick, forgettable, fragmented interactions. I started asking myself, could it be that dopamine, the thing that once fueled my drive, passion, and creativity, was now pushing me toward a sense of loss? I dug deeper and discovered a concept called dopamine deficiency adaptation, a kind of maladaptive adjustment in the dopamine system. It means when you receive too many short-term rewards, the brain raises its expectation threshold. You need more to feel excited. The little things that once brought you joy now feel boring. Ordinary moments that once moved you now pass by unnoticed, because dopamine got used to being overstimulated. And once your brain loses sensitivity to simple joys, you'll forever chase stronger hits to feel anything again. That's when the more you do, the emptier you feel. And here's the danger: if you don't realize this early, you'll think you lack passion, lack purpose, lack motivation, when in fact, you're just biologically misaligned. Your emotions aren't telling the truth. They're merely reflecting a dopamine system that's been overused for too long. Just like a microphone that's been cranked too high, when you adjust it back to normal, You think it's too quiet, but in reality, you just need time to recalibrate sensitivity to once again feel joy in the deeper, quieter things. I realized that to break the dopamine loop, I couldn't keep living the same way and just try harder. I had to live differently. I had to slow down. I had to accept the initial boredom as part of the recovery process. I had to learn to keep working without getting an immediate reward. I had to trust that on the other side of silence, depth would emerge, and that's exactly what happened. When I patiently moved through days without inspiration, kept reading, writing, working, living slowly, I gradually regained something more valuable than dopamine: meaning. Meaning doesn't come from rewards. It comes from choosing to stay with something long enough to feel yourself truly alive in it, present in it, and letting it become a part of you. It could be a project, a relationship, a habit, or a journey. And when dopamine no longer guides you through cheap thrills, you can finally go deep into things that require perseverance and touch a kind of emotion that doesn't explode, but lasts long enough to bring real transformation. I'm sharing this not so you'll hate dopamine. I just want you to see that the very things that make you feel excited can also bind you. And if you don't learn to understand, direct, and retrain your dopamine, you'll live in a loop. Doot, tired, empty, doot, again, tired, again, empty again, until you no longer recognize yourself. And that's why I started practicing deep work, not as a productivity method, but as a healing therapy for a brain paralyzed by too many choices, too much stimulation, too many so-called urgent things. Because I believe only when you know how to work with deep focus do you stand a chance of breaking the dopamine loop and begin to live a life of true depth. I remember the moment I began to realize it wasn't that the world was too chaotic. It was that I had lost the ability to stay with something long enough to reach its depths. Every day, I woke up feeling overwhelmed by too many things to do, but none of them led to true depth. I just kept doing, kept scrolling, kept moving from the easier task to the even easier one. And once I realized I was being driven by dopamine, I began to ask myself, is there another option? Is there a way to work without being dragged into meaningless stimuli? I started searching, and that's when I discovered deep work. A concept that seemed simple, but had the power to rescue me from the very spiral I once thought I couldn't escape. Deep work is the state of being fully immersed in a cognitively demanding task without interruptions or distractions. But for me, deep work wasn't just a skill, it was an act of rebellion, a conscious resistance against the manipulation of dopamine. Because when you learn to stay with something hard, something that doesn't give you immediate rewards, you're telling your brain, I don't need to be stimulated to take action, I choose consistency. At first, it wasn't easy for me to enter that state. I sat at my desk, turned off notifications, opened my laptop, and within 10 minutes, I found myself holding my phone, checking messages, opening new tabs, or making excuses to stand up. My brain resisted. It hated boredom. It craved stimulation. But then I realized that very moment when you feel the most uncomfortable is the threshold of depth. And if you can get through the first 15 minutes, something strange starts to happen. Silence begins to speak. Ideas begin to emerge. A flow starts to carry you. And dopamine is no longer what pulls you away from work, but becomes the reward you receive for staying long enough. I began restructuring my work schedule, not to do more, but to go deeper. Every morning I reserved 2 hours, without social media, without emails, without notifications, just one task: writing. At first, it was hard. I felt disoriented, uneasy. But week after week, I started accomplishing more in those 2 hours than I used to in a full day. And the most amazing part was, I wasn't just finishing tasks, I was reconnecting with myself. Each sentence, each idea, each train of thought became a part of me, no longer just a job to check off. Deep work is not just a working method. It's a journey back into the depths of your own mind. When you go deep, you are forced to pause the surface level fragmentation and venture into the quiet space within. And it is exactly in that space, that moment where it feels like there's nothing, that the brain begins to rewire itself. Scientists call this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself. Every time you stay long enough with a cognitive challenge, you strengthen your neural pathways, making them more powerful, more flexible, more enduring. Conversely, every time you bail out at the sound of a ping, you reinforce the circuits of distraction, weakness, and short-term response. One thing I discover in my deep work journey is that the longer you sit with a problem, the deeper you get into the questions that truly matter. At first, I wrote just to get my work done, but then I started writing to understand myself. I wrote to discover what in me needed healing, what needed to be transformed. And those pages became a place where I no longer sought dopamine, but a place to return to myself. I'm telling you this because I know you too have meaningful work to do, long-held dreams, projects you know you'd be proud to complete, but you feel like you can't even begin, or once you start, you can't keep going. Maybe you think you lack motivation, time, inspiration, but I want you to ask yourself this instead. Are you living in an environment that allows you to enter deep work? And if not, are you willing to recreate that environment? I started over. I redesigned my days not to avoid distractions, but to protect my focus like sacred territory. I turned off nearly all notifications. I used a secondary phone with no internet during work hours. I learned to take deep breaths whenever the urge to check something popped up. And I wrote, not for others to read, but to let my brain stay with itself. From that, I began to feel something profound. When you gain the ability to work deeply, you don't just become better, you become freer. You're no longer pulled by temporary thrills. You're no longer guided by dopamine spikes. You begin to lead yourself. To me, deep work is no longer a productivity tool. It is a spiritual act, a return, a doorway that led me out of a shallow, fragmented, sensational world and into a place of stillness, depth, and truth. And I believe you can walk through that doorway too, not by changing your entire life all at once, but simply by starting to reserve a small window each day to do just one thing with your full presence. When you do that, you'll see dopamine is no longer your master, becomes your companion. Only showing up when you've truly created something meaningful. When I truly stepped into deep work and realized I wasn't just working, I was retraining my brain, I began to understand something clearly. Focus is not something you either have or don't have. It's something you build. And like any structure in biological life, what can be built can be rebuilt. At that point, I asked a pivotal question. If the brain is a flexible system, capable of being reprogrammed, what would happen if I deliberately intervened in every neural connection with intention? I had learned that our brains operate on a simple but powerful principle. Connections that are repeated often become stronger. Like a trail through a forest, if you walk on it every day, it becomes clearer, smoother, easier to traverse. Conversely, if you abandon a path, grass and weeds take over, the forest swallows it and it disappears. The brain is the same. It doesn't retain everything. It keeps only what you repeatedly choose. Once I understood that, I no longer saw each moment of distraction as a minor slip. I saw it as a misaligned repetition, reinforcing a neural path that shouldn't exist. And conversely, each time I sat still in boredom, resisted checking my phone, resisted opening a new tab, I knew I was strengthening a new neural groove, one of depth, control, and awareness. Every moment became an opportunity to reshape my brain. I began to live like someone who was redesigning their neural network. Each morning, I didn't just start work, I treated it as the time when I was programming my brain for the day. I hand wrote instead of typing, because handwriting forced me to slow down, to choose words deliberately, to connect brain and hand movement, and that gave ideas more time to form deeply. I walked without music to give the brain space. That's when abstract thinking regions start to link up. And importantly, I meditated not just to calm down, but to manage the autopilot of thoughts. Because I realized thoughts are not truth. They're just the product of neural networks. And those networks can be changed. I began designing my day the way someone would design a neural training regimen. In the morning, I chose the hardest task first, because that's when dopamine hasn't yet been depleted and willpower energy is still full. I only allowed myself access to stimulating content after completing a deep work session, because I knew that doing it in reverse would break the reward system. The brain would learn easy first, hard later, and I'd fall back into procrastination. I practiced doing hard things before dopamine demanded a reward, to rebuild what neuroscientists call the capacity to delay gratification. One of the clearest indicators of long-term success. When you understand this mechanism, you stop living randomly. You start living strategically. Every small behavior, from what you choose to read in the morning to how you respond to boredom, is a neural programming app. And each programming moment, if repeated enough, creates a new neural map where the brain controls dopamine instead of being led by it. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I live like someone observing their brain every day. I've learned to step back and watch my thoughts like a river so I don't get swept away. I choose behaviors that strengthen the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for attention control, emotional regulation, and long-term decision-making. I learned to notice when my limbic system, the ancient emotional brain, tried to take over, and to consciously bring myself back to the domain of reasoning. One day I had a quiet but profound realization. Every time I made the right choice, even a small one, I wasn't just living better. I was changing the actual structure of my brain. And that gave me a kind of freedom I had never known before. Because if I could retrain my brain, then I could change how I live, how I work, how I love, how I exist. I'm sharing this not to make you feel afraid or pressured. On the contrary, I want you to see that you are not locked into a fixed brain type. No one is born with a focused brain or a distracted brain. The only difference is some people learn to reprogram it, and some let the world do it for them. And if you're still reading this, I believe you're someone who wants to design yourself. So where do you begin? With very small things. Each morning, don't open your phone right away. Spend 10 minutes handwriting anything you're thinking. That's how you activate the conscious thinking region. When working, set a timer for 45 minutes. Do one thing only, nothing else. When boredom kicks in, don't run. Sit with it, observe it, breathe, and you'll see that boredom doesn't kill you. It's training your brain to become stronger. And just like that, one neural connection at a time, I rewired myself. Not with expensive courses, not with cutting-edge technology, but with intentional choices, repeated consistently, held with a deep belief that every small decision leaves a trace in the brain, and that trace becomes the direction of your life. When I began to understand that every one of my behaviors, from picking up my phone to the habit of opening a new tab while working, were subtle taps into the dopamine system, I couldn't help but ask, what would happen if I stopped giving my brain these little doses of reward? What would happen if I disconnected, if I stopped pampering my brain? From that point on, the idea of a dopamine detox was no longer just a method I had read about somewhere. It became a biological experiment conducted directly in the lab of my own life. I didn't start by cutting everything off immediately. I knew my brain would resist if I stripped it of all its familiar stimulation. So I chose to start simply one day without social media. Just one day. I deleted the apps from my phone, turned off Wi-Fi, and planned ahead for a day where I would only do 3 things: read, write, and walk. It sounds simple, but you cannot imagine the internal withdrawal I went through just within the first few hours. My hands still reflexively reached for my pocket. My eyes instinctively searched for the Facebook icon, even though it wasn't there anymore. I was confused, not because of a lack of content, but because I was facing something I had never been used to: emptiness. That is the sensation of a brain accustomed to being stimulated every single moment. And when you strip away all stimulation, the brain starts craving. It's just like cutting sugar or caffeine. Your body wrestles, your mind is unsettled. But at that moment, I realized something profound. Dopamine is not the enemy. It's an honest indicator of your dependency. It reveals that you've become used to needing something to feel whole instead of simply knowing how to stay with yourself. The first detox day dragged on slowly, but I didn't give up. I knew that if I could last through the first 24 hours, a mechanism would begin to rewire in the brain. The prefrontal cortex, the executive center, would slowly regain control. And I was right. By the 3rd day, I began to feel a gentle quietness returning in my mind. No more unconscious calls from the phone. No more meaningless clicks. Just me and a thought carried through to its end. After a week, I returned to writing and realized I was writing more deeply, not because I had more ideas, but because I now had space for those ideas to grow without being constantly interrupted. I reread what I had written and saw not just words, but a stream of thinking that hadn't been fragmented, a kind of continuity I hadn't experienced in a long time. And in that moment, I didn't just feel like I was working better, I felt like I was living more mindfully. I began designing weekly detox days. One day with no phone, one morning with no emails, one afternoon walk with no goal. These empty spaces, which might seem pointless at first glance, became fertile ground for mental renewal. Because when you're no longer pulled outward by the world, you begin to hear the voice within again. I remember one afternoon, after 5 hours without any digital contact, I sat under a tree and suddenly tears came to my eyes, not from sadness, not from joy, but because I felt something incredibly strange. It had been so long since I simply felt like myself without needing any stimulation. I sat there in silence and realized that dopamine detox is not just a productivity method, it is a healing journey. It brings you back to your center, where the mind is no longer pulled by strings and the heart begins to listen. From then on, I began intentionally designing a more low stimulation lifestyle. I turned my phone screen to grayscale. I set email checking to just 2 fixed time slots per day. I chose to read physical books instead of scrolling news feeds. And most importantly, I allowed myself to be bored because I understood boredom is not a failure of intellect. It's a signal that the brain is resting and preparing to renew. You ask me, is it easy? I'll be honest, no. But is it worth it? Yes. Because after each detox cycle, I didn't just feel more focused. I felt like I was reclaiming my inner power. Every time I resisted a scroll or a click, it was a moment of strengthening control. Every time I sat with discomfort, it was a moment of telling myself, I'm not being controlled. I choose to stay. Dopamine detox is not a trend. It's not a short-term challenge. For me, it's a way of living. A conscious practice in an addictive world, a method of retraining a brain that's been pulled too far by instant rewards. And when you detox regularly, you begin to feel a very different kind of energy, not from caffeine, not from likes, not from notifications, but from your own inner power to generate it yourself. I share this not to pressure you into quitting the world, but to show you this. Just by choosing one dopamine-free window each day, you've already begun retraining your brain. Try one morning without your phone, one evening without YouTube, 1 hour just to breathe and observe your thoughts. At first it'll seem meaningless, but it's in that meaninglessness that true meaning is born. And then you'll see Mindfulness doesn't come from a course. It comes from your courage to stay with yourself in silence, without rewards, without applause, and still keep walking forward. Once you begin detoxing from dopamine and your mind gradually recovers its ability to function without constant stimulation, you'll realize something interesting. The mind cannot heal if the surrounding environment remains chaotic. That was when I shifted my attention from the internal to the external, from my inner world to my physical space. And I realized if I was truly serious about training my focus, I had to transform where I live and work into a space that protects and nurtures my depth. I started by observing my living environment as an extension of my nervous system, because the truth is, we don't live separately from the world. Every sound, every light, every color in our space has the power to influence how the brain processes information. And if I was trying to retrain my brain to go deep, I couldn't allow the room I lived in to be a place that constantly pulled me away. I revisited my workspace like a designer, but this time I wasn't designing for aesthetics. I was designing for a deeper state of mind. First, I removed everything that distracted me, things I had long considered normal. The TV, out of the room. Overly colorful sticky notes, replaced with minimalist craft paper. Decorative objects I no longer had an emotional connection to, put away. I kept only what made me feel more connected to focus. Natural light, a simple wooden desk, an ergonomic chair, and a 45-minute hourglass placed right in front of me. Next, I reassessed the entire lighting layout. I learned that cool light helps the brain stay alert in the morning, while soft, warm light helps the mind wind down in the late afternoon. So I installed two separate lighting systems: white light for deep work hours and amber light for relaxation or reflection. This seemingly small change allowed me to signal to my brain, it's time for deep work, or it's time to shift into recovery. And gradually, just the shift in lighting became enough to cue my mental state to adjust. I designed the auditory environment to be as empty as possible. No background music, no simulated white noise, just silence, because I believe that when the brain is freed from external sound, it can finally hear itself more clearly. I chose to work during quieter hours, early mornings or late afternoons, and I trained myself to work in stillness, not to fill the emptiness with music, but to let the emptiness be the canvas for depth to arrive. I also paid attention to scent. It's something few people notice. Our sense of smell is deeply tied to memory and emotional states. The right aroma can trigger a specific mental condition. So I experimented with cedarwood, peppermint, and bergamot to find the scent that made me feel most clear and calm. Once I found it, I used that scent at the start of each deep work session, and over time, it became a conditioned signal to my brain, it's time to focus. I established opening and closing rituals for work, like how ancient samurai would unsheath and sheath their swords. Before each session, I wrote down the 3 things I absolutely needed to accomplish. Then I flipped the hourglass and tapped the desk once to mark the transition from living into deep work. When finishing, I turned off the white light, turned on the amber light, and wrote one line: what helped me focus most today? These small actions, repeated daily, transformed the work process from a series of tasks into a meaningful ritual. You might think this all sounds overly elaborate, but I realized if I didn't invest in the space where my brain operates every day, then I was making it unnecessarily hard to retrain my mind. Environment is not a side factor. It is the invisible foundation that influences every conscious behavior. And then something strange happened. That workspace itself began to evoke a feeling of humility and seriousness. Every time I stepped into it, I would automatically step into a better version of myself. Someone who no longer needed a phone, who wasn't pulled by trivial things, who knew exactly why they were here. I called that space my sacred focus zone, where I could touch the depths of myself. You don't need an expensive studio to do that. All you need is careful observation and a few intentional changes: lighting, sound, scent, objects, rhythm, and ritual. Each of those small details, when combined, creates an energy field. a field that distractions cannot penetrate. And the most important thing is not the room, it's that you start viewing your living space as part of your extended brain. You begin to understand that in order to train your focus, you need an environment that supports you, not one that works against you. And once you create a true zone of concentration, you won't want to go back to that lifestyle of opening your laptop anywhere, working whenever anymore, because you'll know depth only appears when there are clear boundaries and you are the one who draws those lines. After I built a living space that supported depth, something strange began to happen. I started to have more empty pockets of time throughout my day. Hours no longer hijacked by phones, no meetings overlapping, no notifications interrupting. But then I discovered something even stronger than distraction. It was the feeling of boredom. And I realized that feeling, which I had always assumed was the enemy, was in fact a powerful teacher I had avoided for most of my life. Boredom isn't the absence of something to do. Boredom is what happens when your mind is no longer constantly stimulated and you're forced to face the void. A kind of void you can't fill with movies, news, background music, or anything external. A void that makes you feel stripped bare, left alone with yourself, and you'll want to escape it immediately because it's uncomfortable, because it disorients you. But within that discomfort, I began to build one of the most critical mental muscles, the ability to endure uncertainty. I decided to stop running. I stayed. I set a timer for 20 minutes a day just to sit still and do nothing. No book, no phone, no notes, just stillness. At first, the first 5 minutes felt like a whole year. I felt trapped in my head with thousands of trivial thoughts, but then something began to shift. My mind began to take out the trash. Excess imagery drifted away like clouds. The voices in my head became clearer, and finally I stepped into a space that was empty yet alive, a space where the deepest seeds of creativity inside me began to take shape. I learned something. Boredom is the essential silence that allows the mind to reorganize information. Just like your body needs rest after a gym session for muscle recovery, the brain also needs white space after high cognitive activity. If you don't allow boredom to arise, you're forcing your brain to work non-stop without recovery interval. And this kind of neurological fatigue, though invisible, is what leads to depleted creativity, mental exhaustion, and a loss of direction in your work. One afternoon, I walked to the park bringing nothing but a small stool and a countdown timer. I sat by the lake, letting the sunlight filter through the leaves, letting the wind touch my skin without naming it. No analysis, no overthinking, no attempts to do something useful. And in that quietness, I realized something deep. I had lived far too long without ever learning to sit still with myself. I used to believe action was the only sign of progress, but now I know. Sitting in stillness, when done right, is no different from high-level neurological training. It was in those very moments that new ideas began to emerge, but not the superficial kind. These were ideas you could never access while scrolling, never forced out under pressure. They came like gentle waves from the deeper layers of the subconscious, released because I was no longer clogging the flow with instant stimulation. I started incorporating intentional boredom into my daily schedule. After every 90-minute deep work session, I gave myself 10 minutes to do nothing. No phone checks, no new browser tabs, no stepping out for a quick reset. I just stayed with myself. And gradually, I developed a rare ability in this modern world, the capacity to stay with discomfort without needing to immediately fix it. And that very ability became the starting point of all mental strength. I call it the muscle of boredom tolerance. And like any muscle, you have to train it daily, from 5 minutes to 10, then 20. No need for formal meditation, no need for spiritual hardship, just the courage to turn off all distractions and sit with the emptiness. A space where you begin to see everything more clearly because there's nothing left to obscure your vision. I remember one day someone asked me, how can you sit and write something for 5 hours straight without getting bored? I smiled and said, because I learned how to sit in boredom before I ever sat down to write. What they didn't see were the hundreds of hours I had already spent doing absolutely nothing just to prepare myself for 1 hour of doing something meaningful. I believe this: if you don't learn to face boredom, you will always live dependent on something external to stimulate you. And that right there is the loss of freedom. True freedom is the ability to be with yourself without fear. And to gain that, you must walk through the land of boredom, a place that seems like nothing, but is quietly cultivating everything that's waiting to bloom inside you. After I learned how to sit still in boredom, I thought I had reached a new level of control. But it was precisely in that quiet space, with no distractions, no background noise to hide behind, that I began to encounter something even deeper than distraction or fatigue: resistance. Not from the outside, but from within myself. An invisible force, silent yet persistent, always pulling me away from what is right, always giving me reasons not to do what I needed to be done. I realized resistance doesn't show up as a clear voice in your head. It doesn't say, "Don't work today," or "just give up." It's subtler. It shows up as a nameless tiredness, a feeling of not ready yet, a sudden urge to check your email one last time, or the inexplicable compulsion to reorganize your desk. Resistance hides in the smallest acts, but has the greatest power because it pulls you away from depth right before you reach the threshold. I began to observe the moments I was most likely to procrastinate, and then I saw a pattern. Resistance was always strongest when I was about to touch something truly important: writing a new chapter, making a difficult phone call, starting a project I knew would change my life. It was at those very moments that resistance felt like gravity. I didn't want to face it, but this time I made no more excuses. I chose to sit and observe resistance as if watching a living entity present inside me. I started journaling, not about what I had accomplished, but about the times I didn't do what I needed to do. Each page became a dialogue with resistance. Why didn't I start today? What am I afraid of? If I don't do this, what will I really lose? And through those honest lines, I discovered resistance often stems from invisible fear, the fear of becoming my highest self. You may think that sounds strange, but it's actually easy to understand, because becoming a better version of yourself means letting go of parts that, though outdated or ineffective, still feel familiar. Resistance is the comfort zone fighting for its survival. And if you're not conscious enough, you'll mistake resistance as a signal that you're not ready yet, when in fact, it's just your brain reacting naturally to uncertainty. I began training myself to move through resistance. I didn't try to overpower it with will. I breathed with it. I named it. I wrote it down every time it appeared. And most importantly, I acted even while it was still there. I didn't wait for resistance to disappear before I moved. I moved with it. And something strange happened. When you act while resistance is still present, you take power over it instead of being controlled by it. I learned a simple yet powerful technique. Count from 5 to 1 and take action within those first 5 seconds. No waiting, no analyzing, no negotiating with myself. Just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stand up and do it. This technique helped me break through the wall of hesitation before my brain could manufacture another excuse. And once I started, resistance began to fade, because action is the only thing that gives resistance no place to live. I also changed the way I viewed tasks I used to procrastinate on. Instead of thinking this is hard, I began to see them as opportunities to become stronger than I was yesterday. Every time I moved through resistance, I wrote, I overcame it through presence, not pressure. And this practice, over time, began to rebuild my trust in myself, a trust not rooted in achievements, but in the commitment to act, even while internal resistance still lingered. You might be living with resistance every day without naming it. Maybe it disguises itself as being busy or insists that you must finish all the small things first before the important ones, or it hides behind perfectionism that keeps you from ever starting. But if you dare to pause and observe, you'll see resistance doesn't need to vanish, it only needs to be seen. And once you see it with a non-judgmental gaze, it loses its power over you. I share this not because I've conquered all resistance in life. I still face it almost daily. But now I no longer run. I've realized resistance is the place where latent strength sleeps, waiting for you to pass through and awaken it. And each time you overcome it, even just a little, you're building a part of your inner power that no one can ever take away. After I had the courage to face the resistance within myself, a natural question arose. So how did the best people, the true masters, overcome their resistance? I began observing, listening, rereading biographies, studying the behaviors, habits, and mindsets of those I deeply admired, from scientists to artists, from elite athletes to global thought leaders, and I discovered something fascinating that I had never truly noticed before. They didn't live in a world controlled by temporary stimulation signals. They created a world of their own, where silence, patience, and deep focus formed the foundation of all their creativity and achievements. Nothing flashy, nothing impulsive. Everything was built from sustained presence, from a kind of attention that ordinary people can hardly maintain for more than 5 minutes. I remember the first time I read about Carl Jung, he would spend hours each day, not writing or treating patients, but simply sitting and looking into his own mind as meticulously and patiently as an explorer studying the cosmos. Or Leonardo da Vinci, who repeatedly drew the same anatomical detail hundreds of times just to understand the subtlest human motion. That wasn't perfectionism, it was immersion in depth, a kind of depth that offers no instant dopamine, but something far greater, sustainable meaning. I also thought of scientists like Richard Feynman. He once spent months contemplating a single equation, and he considered it a joy, not a burden. When I read about Einstein's work process, what impressed me wasn't his extraordinary intellect, but his ability to stay with a single idea for a long time without knowing if it would lead anywhere. That was depth. A kind of depth that today's world, with its constant clicks and updates, is gradually wearing away from our very neural structure. I began to ask myself, if the greatest people all chose depth, then why do we, those who want to grow, let dopamine lead the way? The answer is because dopamine is easy, it's fast, it activates the primitive parts of our brain where just a bit of praise, a like, or a glance of attention is enough to give the illusion of progress. But that's a delusion, because dopamine teaches you to enjoy the feeling of being busy, while depth teaches you to be patient with what truly matters. From them, I learned a life principle I'll never forget. Don't build your career or your life on feelings. Build it on value. Value comes from staying long enough with what's important, even when there are no clear results. Depth isn't flashy. It isn't attractive. There's nothing to show off on social media, but in that silence, you become the most powerful version of yourself. I also observed those who failed in their journey of creation and contribution, and there was a frightening commonality. They let dopamine lead. They worked for attention. They made decisions based on instant appeal. They fell into the trap of must be recognized now instead of must be valuable long term. And once you live in that mechanism, your brain becomes addicted to praise to the point where you can't do what's right without a reward. The great people I learned from didn't need applause. They didn't need immediate recognition, because they had built an internal source of dopamine arising from simply doing what was meaningful. Whenever they worked, they entered the flow state, a state where dopamine was no longer an external reward, but a natural consequence of inner connection and deep purpose. I began applying this to myself. I asked one question each morning: is what I'm doing today coming from depth or from an immediate urge? If the answer was the latter, I stopped. I learned to delay gratification. I didn't post right after finishing a piece. I didn't seek praise after doing something hard. I simply stayed with the act. and felt dopamine emerge as a subtle reward, not an addictive fix. I started admiring silence, admiring those who worked quietly and steadily, those who didn't need the spotlight but were the deep roots behind every true achievement. And I saw real success isn't loud, it's as solid as bedrock beneath the earth. Not easily seen, but unshakable. You may be surrounded by the constant noise of the world. You may be pulled by compliments, short-term goals, and surface-level attractions. But if you want to build something meaningful, look again. Are you living in dopamine or are you choosing depth? Write down one thing you can do every day, not for recognition, not for instant dopamine, just to develop depth. Then repeat it day after day. That's how you begin the journey walked by the great ones. After realizing that great individuals don't chase dopamine but choose to live in depth, I began to seriously consider what allows them to sustain that state over the long term, not just for a day or a week, but throughout their entire careers. And then I discovered something that seemed simple, yet completely changed the way I viewed myself. Focus is not just a skill, it's an identity. A skill is something you can practice a few hours a week. Identity is different. It's something you live with every single day. It doesn't depend on your mood or vary with your schedule. It is the deepest I you choose to become. And I started asking myself what seemed like a simple question: who am I when no one is watching? When no one is requiring me to work? Do I still choose to focus? I used to think that all I needed was enough discipline, enough checklists, and enough tools to become focused. But then I realized no tool is stronger than the identity you choose to live with. Because when you believe I'm someone who easily gets distracted, then no matter how perfect your time management system is, your brain will always find a way to derail you. But if you start affirming, not through words, but through repeated actions each day, that I am someone who lives in deep focus, then your behavior will naturally align with that belief. I started building this new identity from small details, not by forcing myself to work 8 hours straight, but through small, consistent commitments. Every morning, I dedicated 30 uninterrupted minutes to the most important task of the day. I placed my phone out of reach. I opened a blank page and wrote without editing. I didn't aim for perfection. I only aimed for honesty with the identity I was cultivating. The early days were hard. My brain, like a child used to sugar, was startled by the sudden lack of dopamine from social media, emails, or easy stimuli. But I stuck to the ritual. I didn't need to see results immediately. I just needed to remain loyal to the identity I had chosen. Gradually, focus stopped being something I had to strive for. It became something that felt like me. I also learned to redefine focus, not as a state of no distraction, but as the repeated decision to return to what matters, even after you've been pulled away. To me, focus is the ability to come back to the work, to the original intent, to myself, no matter how loud the world becomes. I remember one morning I was writing and the thought popped up, maybe I'll just check a message quickly and then come back. I nearly reached for my phone, but then I put down my pen and whispered to myself, I won't betray my identity for a small hit of dopamine. That sentence wasn't meant to sound poetic. It was to remind myself every small action is a vote for the identity I'm building. And I want every one of those votes to be cast in favor of presence, not interruption. You might be thinking that you're not disciplined enough or not talented enough to focus that way. But I want you to know this. Focus is not innate. It's an identity you can build day by day. You don't need to change everything at once. You only need to start with one block of time each day, a block where your mind can be still. No notifications, no multitasking, just you and what truly matters to you. I also learned that every time you choose to focus, you reaffirm your self-respect, because focus is the profound act of telling yourself this matters enough for me to stay with it. In a world racing toward fragmentation and distraction, the act of staying with a single task without being pulled away is a form of freedom. And the greatest freedom is the ability to control your own attention. I began to feel a clear transformation. My work wasn't just more efficient, it became deeper. I no longer wrote just to finish, I wrote to understand myself. I no longer read to remember, I read to connect. Every time I entered a state of focus, I didn't feel lost anymore. I didn't need to do more, I just needed to stay long enough for what matters to emerge. And you can start this today. No need to wait for inspiration or the perfect condition. You only need to answer one question. What identity am I choosing, and what action today will serve as evidence of that? If you choose to become someone who lives in depth, then just one quiet hour each day, and you've already started laying the foundation. Every decision to return to what deserves your attention, no matter how small, is a declaration for the future you want to live. After I began living with the identity of someone who is focused, I realized something even more important. There would be days when I felt absolutely no inspiration, no spark flashing in my mind, no whisper saying, this is the moment to do something great. Just an ordinary morning, a blank page, and a quiet question, will I continue today or not? It was in those very moments that I understood the deepest truth no one had ever taught me. I don't live to chase inspiration. I live to create what's meaningful, even when there's no inspiration at all. Inspiration is fragile. It comes like a breeze and leaves without warning. You can't control when it shows up, nor can you hold on to it. But meaning is different. Meaning is something you create through commitment, through repeated action, through the decision to stay with what matters, no matter how you feel. I used to live in a state of dependency on inspiration. If I felt excited, I would write. If I felt motivated, I would work. But on a gloomy day, when my mind felt heavy, I would easily let everything slide with the excuse, today just isn't the right time. Just like that, I handed over the control of my life to something entirely unpredictable. But then I looked back at those I deeply respect. They don't work because of inspiration. They work because of a promise they made to themselves. They don't ask, do I feel like doing this? They ask, what deserves my dedication today, no matter how I feel? And that's exactly why they create things that outlive their time. I began to learn how to work without relying on inspiration. I woke up at the same time. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started without waiting for any emotional wave to rise. No motivational music, no inspiring videos, just me and what I had promised to complete. Every word I wrote wasn't born from inspiration. It was born from presence. And I was surprised to discover that the things I created in uninspired states were often the deepest and truest. Why? Because when there's no inspiration, you stop performing. You stop trying to make everything sound impressive. You're left only with the essence, and that's where authenticity is born. Inspiration can sometimes lead you to write brilliant but hollow things, but presence doesn't put on a show. It stays loyal to what you truly believe in. I realized meaning isn't found in the moment of feeling it. It's found in the decision to live with something every day. I choose to live with intentional action. I choose to side with what matters, not what's easy. I choose to do what's right, even when my mood feels wrong. And something strange happens. When I work without waiting for inspiration, that very act of doing calls inspiration forth. I discovered a counterintuitive rule. Action creates inspiration, not the other way around. Every time I begin, even just with a small step, inspiration begins to show up, as if the universe only rewards those who dare to go first. You can't just sit still and hope creativity knocks on your door. You have to knock first with your own consistency. I'm telling you this because I know you too have days when you don't want to begin. Mornings when you feel useless, aimless, and wait to feel more inspired before taking action. But I tell you sincerely, you don't need inspiration to start. You only need one small action to do the right thing. Each of those actions, if repeated, will become your identity. And from that identity, all value will emerge. I no longer chase inspiration. I don't resist it either. I just no longer make it a requirement. If it comes, I welcome it. If it doesn't, I still act. Because I live to create what's meaningful, not what's merely impressive. Depth doesn't need fireworks. It only needs you to stay long enough and be honest enough. If you've been waiting for a sign to begin, this is it. Not because I said something grand, but because you've stayed with me until now, which means something in you is already ready. Choose one thing you want to do deeply and start without needing to feel ready. You'll be amazed at what you can create, not because of inspiration, but because of the commitment you bring to what matters. You've walked with me through this entire journey, not just a path of knowledge or scientific analysis, but a journey back to yourself. Perhaps during this time, you've had moments of doubt, wondering whether you could really change, whether you truly have what it takes to live a prosperous life in mind, willpower, and inner depth. But I tell you this from the bottom of my heart, you can. You always can. What you need is not another theory, not another waiting game for the perfect moment or a flash of inspiration. What you need is action. A decision that is clear enough, brave enough, and consistent enough to not back down when challenges come. You don't need to see the whole path. You only need to take the first step with an awakened heart, with a mind connected to what is most profound within you. You may stumble, you may feel lost, but I am certain you will not give up as long as you remember why you started. And if there is one thing you take away from this journey, I hope it's not just the satisfaction of learning, but true inner transformation. A transformation that you don't need to shout about to the world, only quietly act on every day. And before we part ways, I just want to say this to you from one person on the same path as you. Thank you for staying until the final words. Thank you for listening, not just to me, but to yourself. Never underestimate the value of quiet choices, because it is those, not the explosive moments, that will write a life worth living. I wish you, my quiet companion, a clear mind, a warm heart, and an unshakable will. Live a life you're proud of, not for anyone else, but for yourself. I believe in you. And if you still have doubts, then take action. You will be the one to prove it to yourself.